Greetings, one and all. I'm back with Josh. We're going to do another spaceship ride to the Sun Absolute. And I thought I would start with a little quote from Beelzebub's Tales, which actually is quite a long quote. But this is from page 1232. So towards the end. It is necessary to become dead to what has become for you your ordinary life. It is just this death that is spoken of in all religions. It is defined in the same which has reached us from remote antiquity. Without death, no resurrection. That is to say, if you do not die, you will not be resurrected. The death referred to is not the death of the body, since for such a death there is no need of resurrection. For if there is a soul, and moreover an immortal soul, it can dispense with a resurrection of the body. I nearly said immoral soul then.
So well, let's hope not.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. We're working towards our morals and ethics to develop our bodies. And I'm thinking on this, of reading that one, because I was thinking Gurdjieff talks about for our soul to then continue after our death, we have had to develop our Keshjan body, which we talked a little bit about last time in the last show. So I just wanted to, do you have any thoughts from that quote first? And then we
yeah.
From there?
Yeah. I mean, I liked it. And I suppose, I think in maybe most religions or spiritual traditions, there is some sort of similar equivalent kind of idea, of a kind of a death or a transformation or like, a new kind of birth or something that's maybe necessary for man or can happen, there's potential. And yeah, I suppose there's various different ideas of what that kind of death can consist of. I suppose again, like the a common kind of maybe example springs to mind of like what it's like waking up in the morning. In a way, I suppose if let's say if we were in deep sleep or dream prior to waking up, then in a way, like you could say, coming out of that state is a kind of a death. You're leaving, let's say, the world of dreamless sleep, or you're leaving the dream world, in order to enter the waking world again. So you might say, yeah, that's one kind of like a daily sort of death and rebirth that we go through, like leaving one realm of consciousness, or one kind of world, and like being, reborn. You might say daily, in 24 hours, we're kind of reborn again. And I suppose, don't they, some traditions, teachers talk about that idea of the moment, like that moment of waking up in the morning as being quite, you could say, important or special or having a significance, or maybe just being like a good opportunity. Like there's maybe some added potential there in that moment, of waking up in the morning. Because I mean, I suppose you can wake up in different kind of ways in the morning, but sometimes maybe there's more of a sense of a kind of an openness or a kind of a freshness, new potential that's there. Maybe a moment of that. It may last for a longer or short period of time before maybe all the like all our memories and all our our ideas and things come back in. In a way, I suppose there's a little bit of a gap there possibly before we kind of retake on our kind of identity, or maybe like what Gurdjieff talks about, our personality. Like in a way, we kind of like put that sort of, personality, the persona is linked with the idea of the mask, isn't it, in Greece and things. So in a way, like we don the mask, whatever is our persona, our personality that's developed through life. We kind of put that on. It's like we do our clothes when we get up and we go about our business, And in a way, maybe Gurdjieff would say we kind of put it on willy-nilly. It's become kind of automatic for us just to like put on these clothes again, or reassume this identity that we seem to have acquired, for better or worse. I mean, maybe maybe we have no problems with our identity or personality, or maybe we do have some things that we like or dislike about ourselves. And yeah, that the idea that we kind of just automatically reassume that identity and maybe don't take a moment at that time to maybe well, even just look at that process of like what happens when we wake up in the morning and how these sort of memories and identity comes back to us, and also if what we feel about that, like is this the kind of clothes that I really want to wear? Am I finding them? Is it? Do I like the look of them? Does it satisfy me, or am I kind of dissatisfied with them? And if I am, you might say, well, what am I going to do about it? Or yeah, like just recognizing that maybe there is a possibility there to like start the day afresh. Like what would it mean to kind of actually start anew, to begin it again? You might say to begin afresh. Without this maybe baggage or stone or cross or whatever that we've maybe acquired. What would it take to like make a break from ourselves or to make a fresh start? So I mean, again, that could be one idea of death and like rebirth.
Can I just quickly add that Nicole talks a lot about waking up in the morning, and I know Bert does as well. And Nicole says that you should try and set your intentions of in the morning of I'm going to be a good person, speak well, that kind of thing. If they're thinking about all the whatever had happened to you the day before, but then that's also important to do at night before you go to bed. The whole rewind that we've talked before on this show of rewind your day so that you don't wake up thinking about what happened the day before.
I mean, again, you could look at that sort of what we might say a changing world or a changing state of consciousness or plane of consciousness. There's some kind of transition. We come out of dreamless sleep or dreams into the waking state. So that's a kind of you might even say it's a strange kind of event. Like again, I suppose maybe in general we kind of take it for granted how maybe possibly strange it is that we do experience these kind of quite possibly radically different states, that we do go through these changes of state. Like it's, let's say if we were talking to some kind of alien and they didn't like fall asleep or dream at night, and you were trying to explain this kind of experience that you went through, that'd be like a very strange thing. What do you mean? What does it mean that you go off into another world, like this thing you call the dream world? Or what does it mean that you lose consciousness, you go into this deep dream state, blank state? Could again, looking at it from like aliens' eyes, you might see it could seem to be a very strange experience.
I was just thinking, trying to explain to them, we sometimes have nightmares.
It's
quite a hard thing to comprehend if you don't go to sleep.
Again, just like just trying to look at the ordinary everyday things that we experience as humans from a new perspective or from like an alien perspective, it can be quite revealing or just interesting to ponder. Like, it is kind of a strange thing that I lose consciousness or have these other kind of experiences. So again, those kind of events again that we maybe take for granted, they may be quite telling or quite potent. There might be like a lot of potential in the fact that we do go through those radically different states, or if we ponder on it, possibly we might gain some new kind of insights. But like you said, it's often said, isn't it? You can try to take advantage of that moment when you wake up in the morning. You might say, to like set your intention for the day, or like what we're saying, maybe it's an opportunity to like take a reappraisal of myself and my situation, like my inner life and also my outer life. Like, is it fulfilling? I suppose that's maybe a central question. Am I satisfied by the kind of life that I'm living, or this kind of like identity or persona that I'm adopting? And they do say that it can be useful, like to take a moment like that to try to make a connection between those different, let's say, planes of consciousness, Like, I suppose, because if like when you're just sort of waking up, in a way, you might say you still kind of have one foot in the sleep realm or the dream realm, and one foot in the waking. So you're kind of in a, you might say, a strange state at that moment when you wake up. And there can be an idea to try to, foster a connection between those two different planes of consciousness or those two different realms, which maybe in general for us seem starkly disconnected. Like maybe when I wake up in the morning, I just have the sense that, okay, now I'm in the waking state and I'm just dealing with the waking world, and the dream world is, kind of completely out of my awareness or my consciousness. So those, maybe in general, those states or planes of consciousness that we experience are quite segregated from each other, isolated. And I think one of the ideas of, in different traditions, the kind of expansion of consciousness is to maybe start to make some kind of connection between those planes of consciousness or those states, so that they're not so segregated from each other. That maybe those different states can start to kind of come into contact with each other. Again, maybe in a similar sense to what Gurdjieff says about our different brains, that maybe in our kind of general state, they're kind of isolated from each other. They don't really have much contact and communication or awareness of each other. Or our different eyes. He says that there's the buffers operate between them, so there's not really any contact between these different parts of ourselves. And that in a way, that breaking down the barriers between those different parts of ourselves is what is needed for our growth, or like maybe a new kind of birth, And again, that's what another idea of death would be like, breaking down, these barriers or separation or segregation that's formed between the different sides of ourselves. So again, that would be another idea possibly to look into. What would it mean if when I woke up in the morning, that if I could maintain some kind of connection with, let's say, my dream self, or if we said it's a different kind of consciousness, it's a different part of me, let's say, that experiences the dream realm, and a different part of me that experiences the deep sleep realm, and a different part of me that experiences the waking realm. Let's say if they were three different consciousnesses or three different parts of myself, then what would it mean if I could, they could start to, come into contact with each other, so that I wasn't just limited to being like on or off. I wasn't just limited to being like in one mode of consciousness at a time, but maybe I could have a connection between those different modes of consciousness or sides of my being,
and maybe like skipping into it. Oh, now I'm going to go into the other realm or something, just like that.
I'm thinking of like, it could begin by being able to move between them more sort of at will, perhaps, but or maybe like some kind of co-presence. I suppose, like, again, with the idea of the expansion of consciousness, it wouldn't be that so much that I had to, like in the ordinary sense, I have to leave the waking state, let's say, to enter the dream realm. My kind of awareness of the physical world has to cease so that I can kind of enter into the dream realm. And the same with going from the dream realm to the deep sleep realm. I have to kind of let go of the others in order to enter one. So what would it mean for me to be able to be kind of co-present in them? Again, it's just a strange notion, because we can have this kind of either or thinking, or it's one thing or the other, like either I'm awake or I'm asleep, I'm awake or I'm dreaming. So what would it mean if I could stand simultaneously, like part of me, let's say, then could be engaging in the waking realm and the waking state, but at the same time, I could also be occupying, let's say, the dream realm. I could be moving around in those two states of consciousness or planes of consciousness simultaneously.
Would you say it'd be like you're conscious in this world in your waking state?
Yeah.
Somehow your astral body is able to go into the dream state, but you're conscious of it doing it. That kind of. Are we on
So imagine that you could operate in the two planes at the same time. Like you could be moving around here now and talking to you, and at the same time maybe I'm off doing something else, in the astral realm. suppose again that is maybe one idea of the Kejun body, in the sense that they say, well, it's something that can separate from your physical body, you know. Or let's say then the idea of what would it mean to kind of have two bodies? Well, in one sense, just thinking about it, it would mean kind of that you could be in two places at once. You know, if my consciousness is just limited to my physical body, then yeah, it would seem like I could only kind of be in one place at a time. But if I had this other body, then you might say, well, yeah, I could be in two, I could be in two places at a time and doing two things at a time, you know. So again, that would be one possible notion of a kind of a birth. Like, what would it mean to kind of be able to embody that side, like say then my astral body or the dream plane of consciousness, just as much as, you know, my physical body. And again, there might be some kind of death or transformation that would be required in order to do that. You know, like if my attention seems to be wholly occupied with what's going on in my senses, then obviously there isn't something that can separate from that or stand apart from that. You know, if I've just got the blinkers on, I can only engage with the sensory realm. So I think that some of his exercises, and in the other traditions, a lot of them focus on this, trying to, like you might say, develop attention, like being able to keep your attention on, let's say, one thing. It doesn't really matter what it is, whilst you're going about your business. Like, you know, maybe I'm doing some physical task, but at the same time, I'm able to keep some of my attention on, let's say, an idea, even just an image in my head. I'm, you know, washing the dishes, but at the same time, I'm trying to keep my inner attention, my mind's eye, on an image, you know. So again, that kind of development of attention is starting to enable me to, you might say, live in two worlds. Like I'm able to go about my physical life, but there's also some part of me that can, or my attention that can, you know, be engaged with something else, you know. You know, he talks a lot about like the division, you know, of attention exercises, and the development of attention has been quite important for him. So you might see that as almost like a kind of a preparation, you know, that I'm able to, again, sort of live in two worlds. I'm able to keep some of my attention occupied, like you might say, intentionally directed at something, whilst also I'm going about my business. You know, I'm not having to completely lose awareness of the physical world in order to be able to keep my attention on this mental picture. You know, I'm trying to be able to, you know, divide my attention and you know, occupy the two planes at the same time, you know, simultaneously. So that might be one idea of a kind of a birth and death. One in the sense of,
I'll just tell you about something that happened last week. So I was with 3 other people who are in the Gurdjieff work, who were quite new to it, but we were doing the looking at a watch, but a watch with a second hand going round to try and, you know, again, that's directing your attention, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know they won't, because I'm not going to say their names, but one guy, this is what brought us all back. One guy, you know, when you go to sleep, you go like that and catch yourself, did that.
Yeah.
Attracted all the rest of us. I actually suddenly realized when he'd done that, I was looking at the watch, but
yeah,
I don't even know where I was.
yeah.
That guy said he was able to keep his eye on the second hand. This was only about 45 seconds in, but it was really straining him, and he felt himself all tensing up. So I was thinking, well, that's, you know, it's great he was doing that, but I felt that was the wrong result.
Yeah.
What would you think on all that? Of, you know,
well, from my experience, like, yeah, it can be. I mean, it can vary from time to time, but sometimes it can be easier, sometimes they are harder. So yeah, sometimes it could be a real struggle to do that, to, like you say, to like maintain my attention intentionally on something. But I suppose again with the Gurdjieff's idea with, I don't know, the centers then, or even like the waking consciousness or the subconsciousness, I think the idea would be that, like the idea of having the appropriate center to do that kind of work. You know, you might say if it's a real struggle and an effort, there might be some benefit in doing that. But you might say if you get it right, it would be kind of easy, because you might say a different part of us would take over that task, you know. So I agree with you that like when we speak about like the expansion of consciousness, again, it might be, I might just assume what that means is the expansion of my this ordinary kind of consciousness, my daily kind of consciousness that I operate with. And I might think, well, waking up or the expansion of consciousness is just going to be an expansion of that kind of consciousness. But I think again, maybe like what Goethe talks about, he's really talking about the kind of, could say development or activation of like this other kind of consciousness, like what he calls the subconsciousness. You know, you might say it's already there, but just isn't maybe engaging, you know, or his idea with the higher centers. He says in a way they're there already, you know, the higher mental center and the higher feeling center. So in that sense, it's not like you have to grow these higher centers, you know, from that perspective. They're already there and can
They're
do.
working and
Yeah,
coming
they can.
down on us, but we're not awake enough to see them or build.
Yeah, he says that there's a sort of misconnection between the lower and the higher centers. So that would be like another way of looking at it, like how somehow or other that connection being established. And again, that wouldn't be like the lower centers becoming the higher centers, or it wouldn't just be like a development of the lower centers. You know, it would be the activation of, you might say, these higher centers, and then maybe taking control. You know, becoming the sort of seat of authority. You know, so like again, what I mean with like, let's say the idea of being able to be in the waking state and the dream state. That would be like being able to be in two modes of consciousness at the same time. It wouldn't be just the case that I'd be taking my waking kind of consciousness into the dream realm. It would be more like these two modes of consciousness being able to be simultaneously active, you know, at the same time, rather than like again having to be in one mode or another. So yeah, again, that could be one notion of a kind of a death or a kind of a birth, if you could become able to live in these different planes of consciousness simultaneously, you know, as opposed to again being very segregated, isolated, or like the idea with our states, like, you know, let's say our emotional states, you know, there's that idea of like when in sorrow remember joy, or when in joy remember sorrow, you know, that kind of thing. Because again, it can seem like whatever state's present, that becomes our whole world, you know. So it's like I become limited to just one mode that I have, you know, or one of my eyes, you know. This let's say if I'm in a negative state, then it's like I just become completely negative, and that's the whole world for me. That's all you might say that exists, is just this from this negative state. And it's like I can completely forget about the other side of me, let's say, then, that experience the positive state. You know? So I become very.
That it's easier to fall down into a negative state than to raise yourself up into a higher state. But obviously, once you're in that higher state, you know, elation, isn't it?
Yeah, just that again, that idea of being able to be, let's say I'm in some emotional state of upset that's come about. Like on the one hand, being able to experience that, but maybe again being able to experience, let's say, its opposite at the same time. You know, so again, it would be it'd be almost like again having an extra dimension. If I've gone from only being able to experience either positive or negative, you know, one at a time, to then being able to experience two at the same time, like that'd be like having another world, you might say, or it's a whole other dimension. I've gone from one dimension, you might say, to two. I could experience the positive and the negative at the same time, you know. So again, that doesn't, in that sense, it doesn't mean I'm trying to get rid of the kind of negative in a sense, but I'm trying to embrace the whole of myself. It's like, okay, accepting that, okay, yeah, I have these negative states or unpleasant states that come about in me. Okay, I'm not like in a way trying to judge that or even get rid of it. You know, you might say you can't even transform it unless you first kind of accept that it's there, you know. I have to kind of fully embrace it to possibly be able to transform it. I can't start by kind of denying it. I have to kind of fully embrace it. So being able to experience my negative states, like you might say fully, not like trying to get away from it, but seeing if I can at the same time experience or remember, that might be a means of a way into it, what I felt like when I was having a positive state, you know, and trying to like feel those two feelings at the same time, and trying to maybe have the perspective that each feeling had. You know, because you might say, look, the feeling is not just a feeling, but it also kind of colors the way that I look at the world. You know, I see the world through the emotional state that's present. Again, Gurdjieff maybe gives the idea of colors. This emotion is red, let's say. So when the red emotional state is present, it's like looking through red tinted glasses. Everything takes on that kind of shade. So if I could, if I could experience the red emotional state and see the world from that perspective, and then at the same time experience the green emotional state and see what the world looked like from that perspective simultaneously, you know, it would be there'd be the possibility for those two different states to interact, which he says generally we don't. Our different emotional states don't get some kind of co-presence. They don't get to rub. They don't get to meet each other. Same with our different eyes. You know, they don't get to come into contact with each other.
Yeah, one's always going to be in ahead of the other, doesn't it? Yes, on the eye.
just in one at a time. That kind of focus that we can only be in one state at a time or one place at a time. You know, it's very one-dimensional, you might say. So if we can come to even just standing two at the same time, that's quite a big step up, you know. But again, you might say that might require an effort at that moment of being in whatever emotional state that I am to remember, oh yeah, I'll make the effort to remember these other states and try to bring them into contact with the state that I'm currently in, you know. And from that, maybe to try to get a bigger perspective, like say even just on myself, you know, appreciation for these different people in me, these different eyes, like some kind of wholeness, you know, to be able to see myself from a larger perspective, you know, rather than just only ever seeing one side of myself at a time and fully taking that to be me, you know. Again, like he says something that whatever state is present or whatever eye is present, it takes itself to be the whole, you know, or the reality. And
So
again, you might
recognizing your different eyes within you. So in Beelzebub's Tales to his grandson, when Gurdjieff's talking about Jesus Christ and the resurrection and such things, he was saying that Christ was able to do, I'm just going to read it, put my glasses on to read it so I don't get the word right, the Aum Zanushino, which is some kind of transforming process. And that's what Gurdjieff was able to do. And I was talking to someone about this a couple of years ago because he gave me the book about the Tibetan lamas who are able to, when they knew they were going to die, put themselves into a certain state and create the rainbow body. And it kind of has a link to the Christ in the cave, because all that was left was his shroud. And with the Tibetans, when they shrink down as they're dying, which is really weird, it's a very strange process. It's only ever been filmed once recently by Western people. And all that's left is their shroud as they become, or not their shroud, their Tibetan monk cloak, as they go off in their rainbow body. And I'm wondering if this is what Gurdjieff himself might have experienced, maybe when he was out in Tibet, because I'm a strong believer he did go to Tibet and worked out there. I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit about this Aum Shanino as a transformation.
Yeah, well, I can't. I can't say that I've had any personal experience of that. It's hard to talk about it that way. But I mean, I've certainly had experiences with what we might call the, you know, at least the second body. Because again, I think maybe what he's talking about there with the Christ might be obviously at maybe a higher level than what we would generally talk about as the, you know, the second body, maybe more linked with what you've talked about as the soul body, or maybe even something more than that. So, in terms of personal experience, like the closest I can get to it is in terms of the kind of subtle body. Like
It's not the physical body that Christ resurrects, and he makes that very clear in the Gospels. It is not, though they can touch him. It is
yeah, that's a bit different, isn't it?
different. Yes.
That's a bit different that he touches it, and he says it's, you know, for all, you know, intents and purposes, it seems to be a physical body, doesn't it? You know, so that's a bit, you know, that's a bit different to at least generally what we talk about as the second body, or maybe the astral body.
So was he able to solidify that second body?
Yeah, maybe that. Yeah, yes, yeah. I think maybe that's kind of what they're talking about. But again, yeah, you might see that as being dependent upon like the higher body, like the third body being able to operate on, you might say, the second body to that extent that it can, like, you know, solidify it, you know, or at least to another person's perception. But I was going to say that the thing that kind of comes to mind when you're talking about that is the kind of idea of, I suppose, death, the moment of death, in terms of the ideas about being able to leave the body kind of consciously, you know, either maybe having some sort of pre-awareness that the moment of death is coming. I mean, that could happen. You might be able to prepare yourself, or just even if it came sort of unexpectedly, being able to have a different kind of experience of it because of, like, maybe this second body being present. So I was just going to say, yeah, it's some of like my experiences of like what I would say is like separating from the physical body, you know, out of body experiences. There's definitely a sense there. You might say maybe even in those kind of experiences, you're kind of getting a glimpse into what, you know, physical death will be like. You know, if we say that this other part is going to leave the body, then you might say in a way like having experiences of that during life are almost like, you know, near death experiences in a way, because, like, you know, you're kind of coming out of your physical body. But in some of those kind of experiences, yeah, there's definitely the sense that there's the possibility there, maybe if you wanted to, that you wouldn't have to come back to your body. You know, those moments where I like left the physical body, there was that sense that, well, you know, there's somewhere further to go if you want to go in that direction, you know. But there is a sense of a kind of like a barrier or like a connection that you would have to, that once you cross it is kind of, you know, it's the point of no return. You know, I suppose in some of those ideas they talk about, like, you know, astral projection, and like there's this kind of sense of a cord, you know, like some kind of ethereal, almost like umbilical cord.
Yeah, the silver umbilical cord.
Yeah. So I've had experiences like that where there was the sense of this, a certain kind of means of contact that remained with the physical body even when out of it. And yeah, the sense that to go further past a certain point would mean that kind of, you know, separation, that you wouldn't be able to get back into your body. So again, that, I think maybe if that side of you is developed, there could be, I mean, again, certain yogis and things are talked about as kind of doing that. Do they call it the Maha Samadhi, like where the yogi intentionally, you might say, drops the body. So yeah, I definitely think if that side of you is kind of developed, that there is definitely the possibility for that you could leave the body, or you might say die, kind of in an intentional, conscious way. It also reminds me a bit about what he says in Bielso's Tales, doesn't he? I think he kind of says something along the lines of, if you've kind of entered so far past a certain point into the development of your Kestrian body, I think he kind of says that physical death won't occur until that's reached a certain degree of development or maturation, doesn't he? You know, that's as far as I remember in Bielso's Tales, he kind of says that. You know, that if
I remember that myself, but I'm sure it does because I don't remember it all. Maybe it was important to me at that time, but now I'm like, yeah, that would make sense, wouldn't it? If you're already on that path,
yeah,
the higher side will try and keep you going if you've already reached a certain state of
Yeah, I think it's like, yeah, I think it's like saying if it reaches a certain kind of degree of development or maturation, it's like it won't drop the body until it's kind of, you might say, got what it needs from the physical kind of experience. And in a way, I think he links that. I can't remember. I think it's the full last Nathaniel or something principle. Like he talks about these two different principles that people can live by. And again, you might relate that to sort of the law of accident and the law of fate. You know, like if we're just under the law of accident, then again, you might say that our life is a bit kind of more haphazard and, yeah, doesn't really feed our essence. And so he says we come under more of the laws of accident. And then he says, well, if we're kind of more centered in the essence, or if that, you know, kind of grows to a certain extent, and then the kind of law of fate will apply, you know. So again, you might say that law of fate will then take precedence over the law of accident, or that kind of law of fate will take precedence over what happens in our physical life. You know, it will become, you could say, more in control, or just that the physical life will play out in a way that's more suitable for the growth of our essence. You know. But again, yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's possibly closer to people than yeah, like, you know, what they talk about is happening with the Christ and some of these monks in terms of like the physical body disappearing. Because again, that seems to be a pretty, you know, rare occurrence as far as it's documented. You know, certainly doesn't seem to be the case in Gurdjieff's case. And, you know, he died and there seemed to be, you know, a physical body. So again, yeah, I mean, I think that's maybe, you know, a more rarefied situation, or maybe it's just something that's only relevant for a very, you know, small minority of people.
Well, those monks would have worked at it. They'd all, you know, maybe not all their lives, but most of their lives would have been in theological, divine, not divine state, but aiming to get to the divine and working upon themselves, probably bringing their centers into harmony. But Gurdjieff was probably rushed off his feet trying to wake up.
Yeah, I just think maybe it's something that's kind of like a matter of destiny or something. Do you know what I mean? Maybe, like, again, in certain cases, that's what's relevant. But I mean, yeah, generally speaking, that doesn't seem to be relevant for, you know, I don't know, the average person. And at least I suppose in Gurdjieff's teaching or ideas, he doesn't seem to talk about that as a like an aim that's for everybody. Whereas he kind of does say that the sort of, at least the development of the Christian body is something that's you know, that's a nearer possibility, let's say, for the, you know, the general person. You know, it's something that's maybe more of an easy aim, or that has maybe more relevance to them, you know. So again, I mean, he often says different things about like what the aim of the work is. You know, sometimes he describes it this way or that way, but definitely in one of them he says the aim of the work is for a person to develop this second body to at least a certain degree, that again that will kind of take over. You know, that side of them will become the kind of authority. You know, in their when alive in their life. You know, you might think of it as like the higher emotional center, that coming online, or being able to connect with the lower centers and kind of direct them. You know, so that again their life will proceed in a way that's suited to their essence, to its kind of needs. You know, so sometimes he speaks of that as the aim of the work, or again as something that's maybe closer to, you know, the average person, something that's more of a realistic kind of goal, you know.
Yeah, I think that does happen. I think when he talks about aims, it depends on what audience he's got before him, and he knows what to talk about, you know, perhaps a smaller aim to them, and then other people I can talk about higher aims.
Yeah, and yeah, again, I think the kind of subtle body is something that's maybe more closer to people than you know, maybe like what he talks about as the third being body. You know, again, something that's maybe more accessible, because again, it's kind of intimately linked with what we just call our ordinary inner life. our experiences of thoughts and feelings. Again, you might say the very fact that we have thoughts and feelings is kind of an expression that we do have, let's say, an astral body, or in some state of development. At least we have, or at least we have we all have access to the kind of raw materials, you might say, that's formed from, and so like a lot of his exercises is to do with that, like fostering attention towards your thoughts and your feelings, or exploring that side of us. And also, I think in his teaching, that I don't think you find it in many others, or at least not explicitly, like sensing, sensation was kind of a big thing for him.
Yeah, that's one of the exercises for the morning as well, wasn't it? Sensing your body, sensing your back, and then your legs, and then your arms, torso, then your head.
I mean, you've probably read more even different traditions than I have, but I don't think you find that very often, do you? Like a kind of quite a stark focus on, you might call it bodily awareness, but like the notion that you can increase the kind of I mean, I suppose you find it a bit in like Taoist things, like with Tai Chi and Qigong. There's certain intimations of it there. The idea that, well, there are these, I suppose in yoga, in some of the yogic teachings as well. Like they'd say, well, there are these energy centers in the body, and you can become more aware of them, and you can become more aware of the physical processes of your body that ordinarily perhaps seem to be below the threshold of consciousness. It's like there is a kind of a bodily consciousness, body brain that can be developed, and one of the ways of doing that is through sensing, what he calls sensing. And again, I don't know how much you've experimented with yourself, but it can produce quite stark results, and he does say that there's a definite kind of a link between that body consciousness, like developing that, and how it relates to what we might call the Christian body, or the subtle body. I mean, doesn't. I think he talks about the physical blood as being the link between the bodily center and the emotions, and then he says it's handlers, or in like what he calls the blood of the second body. That it's the link between what he calls the mind, or maybe consciousness, and the emotions, feelings.
Yeah, because our blood can boil, or our blood can slow down, our blood can freeze.
Yeah,
how our emotions are affecting.
Yeah, or like what he says in the about hypnotism, doesn't he? He kind of says that through a change in the kind of physical blood flow, or I think he talks about the opening and closing of blood vessels. He says that through a kind of change in that, whether by intention or not, that can you might say, bring you into hypnotic states, or give, in the sense of what he says as a connection with your astral body, And I know, like, from my own experience, that can happen. Like if I put my attention on my heartbeat, like my pulse, and become aware of the blood moving to my fingertips and to my feet, if I actually foster it, become more aware of that pulse, that flow, that it can do that. It can shift my consciousness into a kind of a more subtle state, or it can bring you into a kind of awareness of your subtle body. And I think a lot of you might say like mediums or like psychics, or I think he uses the term pythonesses in Beelzebub's tales. A lot of them, how they can do the kind of things that they do, like clairvoyance and mediumship and that kind of thing, is through a physical manipulation of the body, and like again the kind of the breath and the blood flow. A lot of them do that without knowing that. Like somehow or other, maybe as a young kid, they just sort of got into doing it, but don't really know how they're doing it or what they're doing. But they just kind of know how to evoke that state. And other people can kind of develop it or come across it almost accidentally through exploring like physical sensation. Like you maybe just, maybe you have no aspirations for anything like that, but you're just exploring like bodily awareness, like trying to be aware of my breath and like the physical processes that are going on in my body, and suddenly I might have some kind of psychic kind of experience, or like out of body experience.
Yeah,
So
a
again,
revelation of some kind.
yeah. So I'm just saying again, there's a definite kind of correlation there, or interface between what we might call the second body, or the astral body, and the physical body. And again, perhaps to ordinary conception, yes, the astral body may seem as something far away or ethereal, and might not seem to have almost any kind of connection to our organic, physical processes, or just like kind of somatic awareness. But again, he kind of points to the fact that no, there's a kind of a concrete connection there between this subtle body and your physical body. And so in a way, one means of kind of developing that is through exploring somatic awareness, like bringing my attention to what can I become aware of in terms of this physical, mass of tissue and the processes that are going on here. That kind of physical awareness can lead you into awareness of what they often talk about as the subtle centers, or like in Sufism, I think there's like the Latifa or Latifa. They generally associate them as in the chest, with different colors and different points. And again, I don't know if you've explored it in yourself, but even before I'd heard of it, I kind of, through doing some of these exercises, become aware that there was, these different kind of, not just the chakra centers, but also these other points in the chest. And they had a different quality to them, like, or the ideas of the left, like the left and the right channels, like Ida and Pingala. Again, before I'd heard of them, I just noticed it in myself that the kind of left side of my body had a sort of different quality to it, to the right side, So I was just like, that's, interesting, and kind of explored that. And also the idea that there's the sushumna, pronounce it, the kind of central channel, And again, the idea is that those three channels are kind of separated, or that we don't generally, we're kind of either centered more in the left channel or the right channel, in kind of how our consciousness is operating, and that we rarely have an experience of what they call the kind of central channel, and the idea, like again, you might say with our three brains, they're kind of segregated and they rarely come into contact, and if they can be brought into contact, they can have some kind of transformation, or something can be born from that.
You were saying about the emotions and how obviously they're connected to the blood and things. And I think earlier you was talking about thinking. I've always found when I've done these, like I've noticed the same things as you in various ways, then my thinking interrupts and gets in the way. And I'm sure he does say somewhere that we've got to try and not listen to our thinking and just, I don't know, it's like the thinking stops me doing it. Or if I'm doing something like with the watch exercise I was talking about earlier, once I start thinking about it, I can't do it. Or the breathing, I remember doing breathing exercises, and then I started thinking about, why do I breathe? What if I stop breathing? What if I breathe, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It ruined everything.
Yeah. Obviously, I've had experiences. Yeah, I mean, that's a common thing. I think most people can relate to that, Debbie. Because again, it just seems to be. I suppose it might be related to what he talks about as the formatory apparatus, doesn't he? He says there's a kind of apparatus there that's just like churning over associations, and that's almost its function. So it's kind of natural for it to do that. But yes, in a way, you could say it's not that formatory apparatus, you might say, gets in the way, but it's that our attention gets drawn to it. Like he says, it's perfectly fine for the associations to be going on, but they don't have to be occupying your attention. You might say that's the problem, that I can keep my attention on whatever it is, that the breath, let's say, then, without it being, getting distracted onto this association stuff that can just be going on in the background. And again, that's another thing that he points to, that being able for our consciousness or our attention to become centered in the different centers, for it to actually be to inhabit them and occupy them, depending on what kind of things we're doing. Like again, you might say, if I want to be aware of the breath, then would probably seem suitable that I need to get into the body center, or the body body kind of consciousness, but for my attention to be able to kind of, go into that brain and not be occupied with what's going on maybe in the head brain or, the associational apparatus. But it's tricky. And sometimes it can seem easier than others. And, that can only, some development of that could only come about possibly by trying it and find what works for you, But I agree with you. It can be difficult. And also I was going to say, that, like he says about the breath being, the kind of food for the subtle body. And he talks about it's like conscious breath as being one of the main means of nourishing it, And again, I suppose in our daily life, maybe well, for some people it'd be quite an unusual notion, like to say, spend some time being aware of your breath. Usually I'm maybe only aware of it if I'm out of breath or something. That's the only time I kind of become aware of that process. So, that could be another thing that might be unusual for people. But again, I don't know if you've noticed it in yourself, but again, we might typically the idea of conscious breath, we might just assume that all that means is for me just to be aware of my breath. You might say, well, if I'm aware of my breath coming in and out, then I'm conscious of my breath. But I think I would suggest that conscious breath in a way means something a bit deeper than that, rather than just being aware of it. That it can go a step further, where again, it's hard to describe, but it's no longer that I'm no longer like aware of the breath happening kind of from outside, or like just observing it from a distance. It's more like you enter into it, or you might say you become aware of the breath from the body's kind of point of view or something like that, And again, that can bring about kind of subtle experiences or subtle states. Like that's why I guess you might say there's breathing exercises in various traditions. Some of them can be quite, intense and involve like significant manipulation of the breath, like how you breathe and stuff. But Gurdjieff said you don't even necessarily have to do those kind of exercises.
Yeah, he did warn against it.
Yeah.
People that were teaching it wrong. And I know that when I did yoga, which is why I didn't do it for long, it didn't help my breathing when they were making me do, one nostril.
Yeah.
It didn't work for me. Might work for others.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you might just see them as kind of extreme examples of a way in. But he said that, you don't necessarily need to do that. I mean, like you say, it might work for some people. But I think in general, his kind of pointer was more of a gentle, thing that you don't have to manipulate it anyway. Even just kind of becoming aware of it can produce these kind of, you might say, altered states, or can do something to nourish the kind of second body. But like you say, a lot of that's probably going to have to, you're going to have to be kind of relaxed. Like, to try, I guess he gave like relaxation exercises. I think that was a big thing for him, like getting people to be able to truly relax. Again, you might say, well, what does it mean? Because I guess we have the idea of bodily relaxation, but you might say, well, what does it mean to be like relaxed in my mind or relaxed in my feelings? The other brains as well. So.
It's because he used to try and get people to start from your toes and feel your toes, and then your, the bottom of your feet, and then your ankles.
Yeah.
Work your way up to make them relax. And that was a shock for me when I first started doing that. I can't make it relax. Certainly, it took practice. So it shows how we do hold our bodies in a certain way.
Yeah.
One of the exercises was, which he also to do with the I am exercise, but you can do it anywhere. Or when you breathe in and you're feeling it in your solar plexus, and then as you're breathing out, it should be rising up through your spine and coming out. So you're being consciously breathing.
Yeah.
Your body.
Yeah, I suppose like with some of the Tai Chi kind of Taoism exercise as well, there's that idea of like, trying to almost like feel your breath, you might say, throughout your whole body, or there's that idea that the natural kind of unobstructed movement of the diaphragm and the breath is a kind of a means for like relaxing your whole body and like, you know, getting certain fluids and things, or the energy moving around, more freely.
Yeah, because we get blockages. You know, that
Yeah.
when I did Tai Chi really helped me with all that. And I
Yeah.
notice if I do get a blockage in me of like, I've got to clear that. You know,
Yeah.
I think that other people just don't seem to notice they have them and then wonder why they're not feeling more balanced in themselves. But it is important exercises to do. And one, as you said, it's a lot of self-observation as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
A lot of working on
And
your physical and your emotional. Sorry, go on.
yeah, well, I was just getting, you'd have to have the desire, wouldn't you? You know, to do it, to like, be invested in it. Like say, oh, I've got this desire, or interest. If I've got no interest, yeah, I'm not really gonna, or no like motivation. But yeah, he doesn't he? Says that the breath is a kind of one of our main foods, and I think it's often tied to the emotional nature. And that, again, through the, like he doesn't, he kind of says through conscious breathing that we can, it's a means for like purging toxins, and for a possible means of stabilizing ourselves in a kind of more positive state. Like I think he says that the breath, in a way, conscious breath is a kind of a joy, or like an enlivening, a relaxation, or kind of a positiveness, that again, maybe in general, people miss out on. There can be a lot of negativity and stresses and things that maybe could be released just through something as simple as being aware of your breath. Again, people often know it sort of colloquially, like the idea of if you're upset to take a breath. So there is a kind of colloquial sort of knowledge that the breath does have some influence on your emotional state. But yeah, in general, we don't seem to make use of that or explore the possible ramifications of it.
They have
Like
that
how,
whole thing of if someone sees you, well, someone who's a bit more perhaps aware, sees you in an emotional state of some kind, they're like, take a breath,
yeah,
count to 10 kind of thing. It's
yeah,
very good exercise to do when you're kind of caught out and ready to either explode or, I don't know, break down or whatever. Take that
yeah,
breath.
yeah. I guess because like again, the idea that it's like a kind of a primary means of connection, you might say, between your bodily state and you might say your inner state, your mental or your emotional state. Again, it's an obvious thing that if I hyperventilate too much, then at some point I'll probably lose consciousness. Or if my breathing slows down too much, then again at some point I'll probably lose consciousness. So we know that scientifically that you need the state of your breath influences your state of consciousness that you're in. So again, it's just something that we maybe don't explore in terms of what possibilities that could have. Again, yeah, I do think that. Again, I know in myself that if I'm maybe getting stressed out with things, or just agitated in some way or another, that just taking even just 1 second just to bring my attention to the breath can immediately kind of like bring kind of a relaxation or a transformation of the state. So again, it's like something there that tells that possibility. But it's just a case of whether you want to make use of it, or explore that.
And also being more of aware of how you're being, whether it's breathing, how you're standing or sitting or whatever in a situation, does kind of bring you back to yourself and makes you, I wouldn't say see the whole situation, but it is a better state of being than being all agitated anyway. And this is what Gurdjieff is trying to make us become aware of why we follow certain patterns when situations or the same old mechanical things happen to us. We're trying to break those patterns so that we're not standing there rigid, but instead taking a breath and observing the situation and how we're reacting or how other people are reacting.
Yeah, yeah, like being able, like you say, he talks about our kind of repertoire, doesn't he? So, we have these, again, like different identities that we take on. And like he says, different physical postures. I mean, he almost kind of says that with every posture that we've acquired, there's a corresponding emotional and mental posture or state, you know. So again, if I'm just moving in a kind of, you might say, unconscious way, then yeah, those postures that you might say are influencing the mental and emotional states that I will be experiencing. And so there's an opportunity there that if I move in a different way, just physically, or adopt a different posture, or just become more, like you say, somatically aware of the movement of my body, that, I mean, who knows how far that will go in terms of the ramifications that it has on my kind of mental and emotional state. You know, like you say, we can get stuck in these kind of ruts of the kind of thoughts that we have maybe repeating, or the kind of emotional states, or certain questions, you know, could keep coming up for us. And again, it might be an unusual notion to say, well, just explore moving differently with your body, and though that might resolve some of those kind of patterns or questions, you know, that we have. Again, his idea was that we can think with our bodies. You know, that we might have a question that we think is very cerebral, you know, and nothing to do with physical movement, and yet by doing some kind of physical movement, maybe a dance, who knows, there might be the possibility there to get an insight into that question, to get an answer, you know, to be able to ponder that question with one of our other brains, you know.
Well, I've noticed how the time's going. So I was wondering, do you want to bring it to an end here? I thought
Yeah, whatever you want,
I've
whatever you
covered a
want.
few subjects there. So I want to thank you for coming along and chatting again. So
Yeah,
you've still got your tapestry of Beelzebub up at the WordPress, or even
yeah,
yep.
yeah.
And I've still got my website, and obviously this channel, and my books are available still through that. And we were saying before, if anyone's got any questions they'd like us to tackle, or any thoughts or comments on the Gurdjieff work, do get in touch and let us know that we can perhaps tackle next time or something. You know, tell us what you want us to talk about. So thank you again, Josh.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say thanks to everyone. And till next time, peace and out.